Okay, so we all think we know the story of 1776, right? A heroic struggle for liberty, a bunch of patriots forging a brand new republic. And look, it's a powerful story. It's absolutely central to the American identity. But what if there's a lot more to it? Let's peel back some of the layers on that story we all know so well.
And this quote from John Adams, this really captures the whole vibe of the time. The core idea was that for a republic to work, you needed public virtue. Basically, citizens had to be willing to put the common good above their own personal interests. This was the moral and philosophical bedrock they were trying to build on.
But here's the big question. What if that revolutionary moment wasn't really the beginning of the American story? What if it was just one chapter in a much, much longer, more complicated, and honestly often contradictory epic of conquest and creation? That's what we're going to dig into.
To really get this, we have to rewind the clock. And I mean, way, way back. We're going to a time long before any European ships ever saw these shores, to uncover the original American story. Just take a look at the sheer scale of time here. The entire history of the United States, from 1776 all the way to today, is that tiny little sliver at the very, very end of this timeline. For over 20,000 years before the Revolution, this continent was already home to people and civilizations.
For decades, the story everyone accepted was the Clovis first model. You know, the idea that the first Americans were these big game hunters who crossed the Bering Land Bridge about 13,500 years ago. But recent discoveries have just completely blown that theory out of the water. The evidence we have now points to a pre-Clovis population, pushing the timeline for humans being here back by thousands of years.
And the story gets even weirder and more mysterious. Geneticists have found these traces of a really old group they call Population Y in some Amazonian peoples. And get this, their DNA isn't linked to Siberians, but to the indigenous peoples of Australia and New Guinea. This hints that there might have been an even earlier wave of migration that was later absorbed by that bigger group that crossed the Bering Land Bridge. The story of America's first people? Yeah, we're definitely still figuring that one out. So here's the crucial point. The arrival of the ancestors of Native Americans, well, it was its own kind of conquest. It wasn't just a gentle settlement. It was a super fast expansion of people that actually led to the extinction of megafauna. We're talking mammoths and giant sloths. And that fundamentally changed the continent's ecosystem forever. This was the first great American conquest.
And that theme of conquest? It echoes right into that more familiar story of 1776, where we have to confront the central, massive contradiction of the American Revolution.
This was it. This was the ideal that launched a nation. A truly revolutionary idea of human equality and natural rights, spelled out for the whole world to see in the Declaration of Independence.
But even back then, people were pointing out the glaring hypocrisy. As this one person put it, what could possibly be more ridiculous than an American patriot signing resolutions for independence with one hand while literally holding a whip over enslaved people with the other? How could a nation possibly be fighting for liberty while holding hundreds of thousands of people in bondage? And this wasn't just some abstract philosophical problem. The war itself created absolute chaos. In South Carolina alone, 25,000 enslaved people, that's the full third of the colony's entire enslaved population, seized the opportunity for freedom by escaping, migrating, or tragically dying in the middle of all the conflict. In fact, for a lot of colonists, especially in the South, the fight for liberty was completely tangled up with the fight to preserve slavery. Think about it. When British figures like Lord Dunmore offered freedom to any enslaved person who fought for the crown, slave owners saw that as a direct threat to their entire way of life. For many of them, that was a huge reason to push for independence.
So, beyond all the moral contradictions, you also have to remember that the revolution was far from a unified struggle. It was a messy, divisive civil war that was, maybe above all else, financially disastrous. We have this image of the colonists, united against the British. But the reality was society was completely fractured. Only a fraction of people were really committed patriots. You had about a fifth of the white population who were loyalists. They wanted to stay with the king. And the biggest group of all was just neutral, trying their best to stay out of a brutal civil war. And financially, oh man, it was a total mismatch. Great Britain was a global superpower. They had a modern financial system, banks, the works. The new United States had pretty much no way to pay for the war. Their paper currency, the Continental,
became so worthless that it literally gave us the phrase, "not worth a continental."
So after they actually won the war, the new nation was basically bankrupt. In 1790, the government was staring down a staggering $80 million in debt. Survival wasn't just about political ideals anymore, it was about whether they could even pay the bills.
So how does a totally broke nation survive? Well, that brings us to the final layer of this founding story, a second economic revolution. That would be the thing that truly secured its independence. See, winning the war was one thing, but trying to compete in a world completely dominated by the British Empire, that was a whole other battle. To survive, the United States couldn't just copy British manufacturing. It had to innovate. It had to create a new system that fit its own unique situation.
So here was the uniquely American formula. Unlike Britain, America didn't have a lot of skilled artisans, which made labor super expensive. But what it did have was a crazy amount of raw materials and energy sources, like wood and water power. And that specific combo forced them down a different path.
And the result was this uniquely American system of manufacturing. It was all about using clever machines and efficient organization to replace the need for those hard-to-find skilled workers. And this wasn't just a minor tweak. It was a revolution in its own right that would pave the way for America's rise as an industrial powerhouse.
So when you pull all of these threads together, you start to see a very different picture. The American founding, it wasn't a single event that happened in 1776. It was this layered process stretching back thousands of years, built on waves of conquest, defined by that deep paradox of liberty and slavery, and in the end secured by a quiet revolution in economics and technology.
This is the American inheritance. It's not a simple, clean story of heroes. It's a complex tapestry woven from brutal conquest and brilliant innovation, from profound hypocrisy and that enduring, incredible pursuit of liberty. So the challenge for all of us isn't to pick one story over the other. It's to figure out, how do we hold all of these truths at the same time?